your toys.
Okay. Double fisted. Trouble is sometimes when I get into it, I use the wrong thing, and I'll start talking. Oh, is this on? Yeah.
I'll let you know. I'll let you know when we go live.
Couple minutes, or do you want to get started right on time? You have a lot to cover.
I thought when I took this topic, I thought, how much can I talk about? We're going to be able to drag this out for 40 minutes. And
Yeah.
then once you open it up, it's just like we could have done 3 weeks of this. Okay, I guess we can start just Good morning. Please take a seat. We're going to begin. I didn't know it was going to be fasting and music. Neither did I. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here this bright and early daylight savings time morning. You know, in my family, we have a little family story about Aunt Jacha. Aunt Jacha was my grandmother's aunt. Her real name was Rachel, but she went by Jacha. And during World War II, FDR initiated wartime, which was like daylight savings time, except it was for the duration of the war. Aunt Jacha didn't like FDR. Aunt Jacha refused to move her clocks forward. For 4 years, she showed up to every doctor's appointment and every movie and every other thing an hour early. But she wouldn't change her clocks. Somebody said, why won't you just change your clocks? She goes, FDR is not going to tell me what time it is. I know what time it is. So on this day every year, I always feel I always think of Aunt Jaja, who of course I never met. So today we are talking about fasting. How many, what I'd like to do is start this off by asking you, what are your questions about fasting? When you got up this morning and came here, what were you thinking you were hoping to learn or discuss? Anything? Nope. Nope. Why do we fast? That's an excellent idea. I mean, it's an excellent question. Jesus fasted, but Jesus was Jesus, right? Yeah, it's a good question. That's what we're going to explore, because I can't answer that because this is the answer, and it really is kind of an extended answer. I just want to say before we begin, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I said to somebody who is usually in this adult forum, I said, you know, on March 10th, it's daylight savings time. Do you think we should have the adult forum? And she said, oh yeah, it'll be no problem. She's not here this morning. I will not say who she is. So let's just launch into fasting. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful question. Is fasting always about food, or is it other things? And we're going to address that too. Especially in the last 10 years, I've heard a lot of people say, you know, don't fast from food. In fact, the Pope just recently said this Lent, don't fast from food, fast from anger, fast from greed, fast from problems, and fast from anxiety. So people have come to use the word fasting to represent anything you want to kind of give up. But traditionally, it's all about food. But then when we get to, is it about food, we get to, well then, how is it about food? Do you have to eat nothing? Can you drink water? And the answer is, it's all across the board. And we will see how that plays out. Okay, so is it a spiritual practice? Is fasting a health fad? Some people fast for health. Anybody here ever intermittently fast? Yeah, they say it's good for you. Is it just a guilt trip that the church came up with to control people? Who knows? Let's jump in. First of all, I want to say it's not about punishing ourselves, at least not in this presentation. Now, surely we know that during the Middle Ages, everything was about punishing ourselves. You know, people just, especially in our tradition in Christianity, people took it upon themselves to mortify the flesh in a number of ways. So, you know, fasting was a way of denying the body. If you had already fasted and you couldn't think of anything else, you would take a flail and beat yourself. Hopefully we have gotten beyond that, and we no longer look at it that way. And we hopefully no longer look at fasting that way either. But I wanted to just put this out there because many of us still carry it in our ideas that fasting is about being sinful. You know, we're sinful, so we have to do mean things to ourselves. We have to be mean to ourselves. We have to subjugate our body. I think there's a lot more to talk about. Fasting is about our relationship with food. Especially in our Western culture, we kind of have an unhealthy relationship with food. When you think about it, we have diseases related to whether you eat too much or whether you eat too little. We kind of obsess about food. And it really, I think it's just a wonderful thing for us to to take a step back and kind of like look at our relationship with food and ask ourselves, how does this impact my relationship with God? Food is a good thing. Food is necessary. Food comes from the earth and nourishes the body. Those are all pretty positive things. So then why fast? This comes to your question. Why do we fast? I'm not here to convince you to fast. I have to read this disclaimer to you. Very important. But to encourage you to think about how your relationship with food affects your inner life and to maybe pique your interest in maybe considering a partial fast or thinking about a fast. Or just by thinking about a fast, you can kind of examine your relationship with food. Although as we go through this, you'll think, no, he is here to encourage us to fast. I'm really not. But I think it's good for you to know how it works and what would happen if you did want to fast. True story. A wise woman once told me that she was taught as a child to stop eating before she was full, to always keep a small spot of hunger in her stomach, and in this way to remember those who are without food. Now, this happened maybe 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. I don't remember where I was. I think it was somewhere like Minnesota. I don't remember who she was, but I remember what she said. And I think it's a very, very incredibly wise statement. She was also very thin, I will say that. But I thought, what a brilliant idea to use the way you eat to remind you of those who are without food. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. Okay. So, what is your experience with fasting? Anybody here ever fast? Okay, terrific. In what way?
When I was in college, we had an experience where we did like a night outside to experience what it was like to be homeless. And so we fasted for the day and we slept outside.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Did you feel that it was a useful experience?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely, right? Somebody else?
I didn't participate, but I know Paige did. Father John had a week of fasting, and they ate like peas. They very limited food. Remember that?
Yeah, Father John, I think, would do a Holy Week fast when he was here. Okay, and it was like from Holy Thursday until Sunday morning, I believe? Started Palm Sunday Eucharist. On when? Monday, Thursday is when the fast broke. And what did the fast consist of? Just water. For 4 days, 3 days, something like that. Okay. There's a variety of ways of fasting. When I was teaching school, I was teaching social justice, and we were talking about, this was back when Southeast Asia was a place that we talked about as a place where there was food insecurity, and we were talking about people in Southeast Asia not having enough food. And after class, 3 of my students came up to me and said, Mr. Fabian, we want to fast. We want to experience. I had mentioned that many people in Southeast Asia lived on a half a cup of rice a day. And they came up and said, we want to go for 3 days on a half a cup of rice a day. And I said, okay, number one, you have to have your parents' permission. I do not want your parents calling me saying, are you trying to kill my kids? But they got the parents' permission and they did it, and they said it was the most meaningful experience for them. They were very hungry, And one girl, her name was Kelly, she said, you know, I would think, okay, I'm going to eat it all at once, so my stomach will be a little bit full. And then I was hungry for the rest of the day, so the next day I decided I'll just take a spoon at a time. But it was an interesting experience for her. So here are some possibilities. Anybody here never fasted? Okay, never fasted. A partial fast, which is when you give up something, but a partial fast can be seen in many different ways. Like you give up some food. I'm giving up chocolate for Lent. I'm giving up alcohol for Lent. Or a partial fast could also be I'm not going to eat until lunchtime. And I'm only going to eat from lunchtime to dinner, and then I'm not going to eat after 8 o'clock. Those are partial fasts. An unintended fast was, you know, we were camping and a bear ate our food, and so we had to go a day or two without food. An intermittent fast is kind of the popular diet of about 2 years ago when you choose times, like you say, I'm going to eat only during 8 hours a day, from noon until 8 p.m., and then I can't eat any other time during the day. Lenten fast, we all know what that is. That's often an abstention thing. Although it varies, some people fast more during Lent than others, as Paige was telling us, and Jeff, here in this parish, there were some folks who did 4-day water fasts for Lent. A health fast, or a detox, juice only. Every year on January 1st, I'm ready for that. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. A 1-day water-only fast, a 3-day water-only fast. Anybody do, well, somebody here has done a 1-day. So Jeff, you would say you've done a 3-day water-only fast. Yes? I'm sorry? Closer to 4 days. Anybody else do a 3-day water-only fast? 7-day water-only fast. I once did one. I just kind of wanted to challenge myself. When I was young, I was into the whole idea of spiritual fasting, and I'll talk about what I learned from that fast, because I learned a lot from that fast. I lost 22 pounds, but it all came back immediately. So don't try that at home. Let's look at fasting in Western religions. Before we launch into our tradition of fasting, I want to very briefly talk about how other people in the Western traditions fast. In Judaism, the Yom Kippur fast is the most famous, but they also are required to fast on Tisha B'Av. They're required to fast from sundown to sundown, 24-hour period. They're supposed to have no food, no water, no sexual relations, no tobacco. I'm not sure how tobacco got in there, but... and also, I didn't put this on, but they're not supposed to wear leather during that 24-hour fast, which is unusual, right? I think because you're fasting from animal foods, so if you're wearing leather, you're kind of still connected to the animals. Yeah. It's Tisha B'Av is a Jewish feast, and I'm really not enough of an expert on Judaism to fully answer that question. It's a feast. Well, you know, it's a holiday, as is Yom Kippur. There are also 4 minor fasts that require a shorter fast from sunrise to sundown. And those are the Feast of Esther, the Feast of Gedaliah, the 10th of Tevet, and the 17th of Tammuz. Tevet and Tammuz are Jewish names for months in the lunar calendar. What I think is really interesting here for us to consider, come on, is that we have a glitch. is to consider that in Judaism, the primary fast of the year is the Yom Kippur fast. And what is Yom Kippur about? It's the Day of Atonement. Atonement with God, but atonement with the people around you. If you've offended anybody, or if you've hurt anybody during the year, you're supposed to make peace with them. So it's interesting that they connect the fast with the covenant that we have among us ourselves. It's not about punishment, it's about reconciliation. And I think that's a very interesting kind of aspect. Thank you. Yes, come on. Okay, we skipped right over Islam. In Islam, the big feast is of course, Ramadan, which starts today of all time, this year. And for Ramadan, they are required to fast from sunup to sundown for 30 days. No food, no water, nothing. That is a very strict fast. I just mentioned that to you because when you look at all this, then the way we fast is kind of like, we're kind of slackers in the, in the fasting category. In Christianity, in the early church, the Didache was a document that was written right around 100 AD. It almost actually made it into the New Testament, but it didn't make the cut. It calls Christians to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. Wednesdays because Wednesdays was the day traditionally that Judas went to the Sanhedrin to betray Jesus. Fridays because Jesus was crucified on Fridays. The fasting consisted of 1 meal a day at sundown. No animal products or wine could be eaten. So you could only have this one meal, and that one meal had to be basically a vegan meal. No animal products, and when we say that, we mean no dairy, no butter, no eggs, only vegetables and fruits. The early church also began to establish a Lenten fast and an Advent fast. We're kind of familiar with the way Lenten fasts work. The Advent fast was generally St. Martin's Day to Christmas. St. Martin's Day is the 11th of November. And because we Christians know how to have a good time, the day before the fast, the day before Lent, Mardi Gras, and St. Martin's Day were considered big party days. People, went out and had a good time and ate a lot of food. I mean, part of that was actually logistical. It's kind of like, we got a bunch of food, it's going to go bad during Lent. We can't eat the meat, we can't eat the cheese. It won't last 40 days, we better consume it now. Also, we need to put a little weight on because we're going to be not eating much during the next 40 days. And fasts were also called in times of crisis. If the river was rising and looking like it was going to overflow its banks, sometimes the bishop would call a fast and ask people to fast and to offer that intention to keep the river from flooding. Whether that was a good idea or not, I'm not quite sure. But that was the way it worked. So what does the Bible say about fasting? Well, as we mentioned earlier, Jesus fasted 40 days. When we go back to the idea of is fasting punitive, do we fast because we're sinful? Well, clearly Jesus didn't fast because he was sinful. So that argument falls right off the table. Paul also fasted after he was, after his conversion to Christianity, before he began his mission. He fasted. The story of Jonah and Nineveh. Jonah went to the leader of Nineveh and said, something terrible is going to happen to your people. And the leader of Nineveh said, oh, well, I will call a fast. And he called a fast, and the destruction was averted. But my favorite biblical quote about fasting is this. Is this the manner of fasting I would choose? To bow one's head like a reed, to lay on sackcloth and ashes? Is this what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Or is this not rather the fast that I would choose? To release those bound unjustly, to untie the strap of the yoke, setting the oppressed free, sharing your bread with the hungry, bringing the homeless into your house, clothing the naked, from Isaiah. Completely different idea of fast, and it goes to your question, is fasting always about food? So here we have in the Bible, written 2,500 years ago at least, an alternative idea of fasting. Because fasting, as we're going to talk a little bit more, and as we mentioned with Yom Kippur, fasting is about the covenant we have among ourselves, the covenant we have with the poor, the covenant we have with God. In Judaism and Christianity, fasting is covenantal, not punitive. There's the vertical covenant. We agree to turn our gaze to God and away from the world. Imagine that there's a window and the sunlight is pouring in. I can choose to turn away from this window. There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. It's not a sin. But I could choose to turn toward the window and feel the sunlight on my face. And in a sense, we can think of fasting that way. It's turning our gaze to God. And to help us do that, we turn our gaze away from the world. Because let's face it, we think about food a lot, don't we? I'm the worst. I can be eating lunch thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner. The horizontal covenant is we are in solidarity with the poor, the hungry, and the marginalized when we fast. To separate from food is seen in all traditions as a way of allowing us to focus on the Spirit. If you have been coming to these forums, you know a while back we talked about the Greek idea of body and soul and how we have this dualism between our body and our soul. And some people don't agree with that there is a body-soul dualism, but many people still do. And fasting is kind of based on the idea that we turn our focus away from feeding our body and toward feeding our soul for a prescribed number of days or for a short time. It's not that food is bad or the body is bad. It's just that sometimes we need to focus elsewhere. And we spend so much time and energy dealing with food, thinking about it, buying it. Consider, when you are fasting, you are not shopping for food, putting away food, preparing food, eating food, putting away leftover food, washing up the pots and pans, putting away the pots and dishes, or just thinking about food. When I fasted, I suddenly realized that I had so much time to do other things. Now, I could have just used that time to, go lay on the beach or something, but the idea is to use that time to get closer to God or to explore your relationship with God. So when you are fasting, it gives you time to pray, reflect, ponder, meditate, read, act justly. You could go and volunteer at a soup kitchen while you're fasting. To be with God and to listen to God. I found this personally in my own life, that it's just an interesting, it's an interesting thing, and I don't know if I can really explain it. Fasting is sort of like a private retreat. If you feel called to fast, there are various ways to do it. 1 to 3 days, only water until dinner, or between breakfast and dinner. 1 to 7 days, no animal products. Another great idea is if you fast, donate the food that you would eat to a food pantry. Or a more simple way to do that would be to figure out how much the food you were going to eat would cost and donate that to a food pantry. Again, it's about the solidarity and it's about the covenant we have as believers with the marginalized. And you can imagine that you feel, we all feel that. We feel that whether we fast or not. But if you fast and give the food that you would eat, either symbolically or literally, to the poor, that solidarity becomes palpable. You are literally feeding the poor. But if you ever wanted to fast, remember, you design the fast. You can make a fast anything you want it to be. You could be like, I'm going to eat potatoes from 9 until 12, and then I'm going to eat fruit from noon until bedtime. It's your fast, And I think it's worth considering looking into. Things I learned from fasting: hunger is only an issue for 24 hours. During that first 24 hours, you are hungry. I'm going to be honest, you are hungry. But whenever you see these movies and people haven't eaten for a week, and they're like, oh, my stomach hurts, I'm so hungry. It's really not true. After 24 hours, the hunger goes away. Other people who have fasted have told me the same thing. The hunger isn't there anymore. You're just really not hungry. You have and that's an interesting part of it, because you're not hungry, but you still have this desire for food, because it's kind of in our head that, we want to think about food. You want to kind of sit there and go, I wish I had a big chocolate cake right now. But the hunger goes away. Solitude is a big part of the experience. Being alone is a big part of the experience. When you're fasting, prayer becomes easier. Maybe it's because there's less things rattling around in my brain, but it becomes an interesting thing. Clarity and focus become easier. When you close your eyes to pray, it just seems like you can enter into that with more ease. Maybe that's just all in my head. I'm totally willing to entertain that, but I experienced it. I learned that energy, when you're fasting, comes from interaction. If I sat by myself, I would start feeling really, I don't have any energy, I'm so tired. But if I went and sat down with somebody and talked to them, I would feel the energy coming from them. I sort of felt like an energy vampire sometimes. And it was just so interesting to me, because I realized that there's more going on than just a kind of like food in, food out equation. I eat food, I get energy. Energy comes from other sources. Thinking about food is counterproductive when you're fasting. You have to just put those thoughts out of your head. In Buddhism, we didn't really talk about Buddhism and Hinduism because that could take forever, because there's a lot of variety there. But Buddha said there are no required fasts in Buddhism. Buddha said, if you want to fast, go right ahead. That's a great idea. But you don't have to. And what Buddha recommended was, he said, here's what I recommend. Here's what I do. I eat from the time I get up in the morning until noon. I don't eat after noon. And that's not like for Lent. That's like forever. That was his life. But the wisdom of what he said was that, like when you get a negative thought, when you start thinking about food, just put it out of your head. Just like, just move on. Put it aside and move on. And probably the most interesting thing I discovered is I am not my body. when you haven't eaten for a few days, you kind of realize, like, here I am, I'm still going, my energy level is not that bad, and I am not my body. You feel that life is coming to you from other sources, from prayer, from talking to people, from being with people. It's just a really interesting experience. And you have a greater awareness of your spiritual existence. If you ever want to fast, partial, intermittent, whatever, preparation is very important. The longer the fast, the more the preparation is important. You should, I think, have an intention. You should pray for something. You should fast for something. It could be for your daughter's job search. It could be for peace in the Middle East. It could be for anything. But as you are praying through your fast, even if this is just a 4-hour fast, a Lenten fast, an Ash Wednesday fast, a Good Friday fast, think about that intention and offer your fast for that intention. It's important to set a schedule, decide when you're going to start. I'm going to start after breakfast. I'm going to start when I wake up. I'm going to go until sundown. I'm going to go until dinner, whatever. Once you set the schedule, stick to the schedule. This is not one of those things where you can, why? Because it's a covenant. It's a covenant you're making with God. And once you make a covenant, you can't just break the covenant. So it's not the kind of thing that like, okay, I'm going to fast until sundown. Oh, it's 2 o'clock and somebody just brought brownies to work, so I'll fast another day. No, you made a commitment. Take one of the brownies and put it in your drawer for tomorrow. Stick to the schedule. I think it's important. Consider the buddy system. It's very good to fast with a friend. And then you can pray together, over the phone even. You can talk with each other. You can support each other through the fast. You can begin the fast together. You can end the fast together. You can have your first meal, your break fast, your breakfast together. If you're going to do a fast longer than a day, I would consider eating lightly for a day or two before. You don't want to eat a big double hamburger the night before a fast because your alimentary system kind of shuts down when you're not eating. So if you put a lot of food in your stomach and then stop eating, that food's not going to go anywhere very quickly. And you're not going to feel great about it. Except that you will experience withdrawal. It only lasts for 24 hours, and it only matters if you're eating sugar, and we're all eating sugar. If you eat a piece of bread, there's sugar in it. You go through sugar withdrawal and caffeine withdrawal. So a lot of times people say, oh, I can't fast because when I fast I get these terrible headaches. You're not getting that headache because you're fasting. You're getting that headache because you're withdrawing from caffeine. We once, years ago, my wife and I got up one Saturday morning and went to a concert, and we had coffee. We went to the concert, and I had this splitting headache. And at the concert was a coffee bar, so I went over and got a cup of coffee, and I took a sip, and the headache went down a little bit. And I took another sip, and I could feel the headache decreasing. And I said to her, Lori, did we have caffeine this morning? She was like, no, we were out of regular coffee, but we had some decaf, so I just made the decaf. Caffeine really, it does things to you. And one thing it does to you is if you don't have it when you're used to it, you get headaches. And that's also true for sugar. But if you just accept that that's going to happen, so even if you're doing a one-day fast, accept that you're going to have a headache. Take some Tylenol before you start the fast. Have a place to pray and meditate. We never think about this, but even if you're only going to do like a breakfast to dinner fast, think about that time as, we just kind of like put it on a shelf, like I'm just not going to eat, and you would go about our normal day, kind of think about making that fast a special moment. Find a little place that you're going to pray and meditate. Have a little chair set up that's comfortable in a corner. A place where you can kind of sit and relax and read the Bible or read a book about spirituality and kind of just be with God. Plan what you're going to do and where you're going to do it. You might want to do a working fast. You might want to, as I said earlier, set up a day at the soup kitchen or a day volunteering at another nonprofit. You may want to spend the whole day in a log cabin up on top of a hill. Again, it's all yours. You can make it whatever you want to. Have a Bible or spiritual reading ready, because you'll want to do some stuff during your fast. Be sure you stay hydrated. Luckily, as Christians, we can drink water during our fast, so stay hydrated. And break your fast with light food. Just as I said, don't start a fast with a big hamburger and fries. Don't break a fast with a big hamburger and fries. Something light, yogurt, rice, something that's going to be light on your stomach. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Again, my point here is not like, I want you all to run home and make a plan to fast, but I want you to consider what it would be like if you did. I want you to consider your relationship with food and how it impacts your daily life, especially your inner life, your prayer life. It's just a situation of turning away from the earth and turning to the Spirit. The food represents the earth. It comes from the earth. It's part of the earth. And when we eat it, we bring the earth into ourselves. That may sound a little too, new agey, but I don't mean it that way. When you are focused on bringing the earth into yourself, it's easy to lose the focus on bringing the Spirit into yourself, or bringing yourself to the Spirit. And so I find that it's very good to kind of take that time to step away from food and toward the Spirit. So that kind of concludes our talk for today. Any questions as we finish? I know in the beginning people asked questions, and I said we'll address those during this talk, but if I didn't address your question, yeah. It's a partial fast. The idea of not eating meat on Friday, only eating fish on Friday, I'm not sure exactly how fish got out of being animals. They're not plants. But yeah, somewhere along the way, fish was okay, but other animals were not. But that is kind of a Catholic thing, and many Episcopalians do it, and actually my wife and I do it too. During Fridays in Lent, we avoid red meat. Well, any meat, yeah, chicken, beef, pork. It's kind of a hangover from the Wednesday and Friday fast. But it then got down to Friday, and then they undid it for Catholics. Some Catholics want it to come back. What I think is very wise about our Episcopal tradition is that we don't come out and say, you have to do this, you have to fast on Fridays, you have to not eat meat on, it's kind of recommended, but it's your decision to fast or not to fast. But yeah, it's a good question. Why that? In the Catholic Church, and we often think that it kind of brings, see, this topic like leads to other topics, you know. It brings up the idea that we tend to think of religion as a monolithic force. We kind of think like, well, what do Episcopalians do? Well, the answer is all Episcopalians do not do the same thing about fasting, about prayer. You know, the Catholic Church is kind of monolithic because they have the Pope, and the Pope can kind of make these decisions. You know, and we've heard that, but even that is a very recent development in the last 100 years. Most of us grew up and we heard, oh, the Pope has decided that nobody can use birth control, so that's it. Oh, the Pope has decided that women will never be ordained, so that's it. If you go back a few hundred years, the Catholic Church, well, if you go back to the Middle Ages, there was no number of sacraments. There was no 7 sacraments. People argued about it. Some people said there were 15 sacraments. Some people said 12. Some people said 7. Some people said 3. And there was a certain wisdom in the mystery of not knowing. And then suddenly in the 1200s, St. Thomas Aquinas, who knew everything, at least he thought, he wrote the Summa Theologica. Summa Theologica is Latin for everything about theology. And he decreed that there were 7 sacraments. And 100 years later, it took 100 years for the Council of Trent to, actually it took a couple hundred years for the Council of Trent to codify that and say, yeah, he was right, 7 sacraments. But in the old days, the Catholic Church also had many of these things that were left to mystery. And in our church, many of these things are left to mystery, fasting being one of those. It kind of varies from diocese to diocese. Some Episcopalian dioceses, the bishop might come out and say everybody should do this on Friday or not, but others they don't. And I think there's something beautiful and wise about that, because we don't know, we can't like say we know. I mean, there's certain things we know. Jesus Christ was the Son of God and the Messiah. He died on a cross. He rose again 3 days later. Absolutely, we can't argue with that. Fasting, we can argue about that. And there's beauty in the argument. There's wisdom in us talking about it and hammering it out and thinking about it. And plus one of the problems is the minute you come down and say something, somebody's going to disagree with you. So the minute you say, nobody can use birth control, 10,000 people are going to stand up and say, oh, yes, I can. It's better, it's interesting to point out that the birth control pill was made widely available in 1961. The Pope did not weigh in on it until 1968. The church really didn't want to weigh in on it. They wanted to leave it alone, but people all ran to their priests and said, well, they have these pills now. Can I take one? Can I take one? And the priests were all going to the Pope going, what do we tell them? Everybody's asking, what's the Catholic position on this? So the Pope said, okay, here's the Catholic position. And immediately, half of Catholics stood up and said, no, you have no right to tell me that. Well, then why were you asking? It's better to live with the mystery, in my opinion. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah. Absolutely. There are certain people who, because of diabetes or other reasons, my daughter has an esophageal hernia. She has to have food in her stomach. If she doesn't, she begins to have severe pain. So she said, I actually would like to fast, but I can't. So yeah, in all of these traditions, in Judaism, in Islam, in Christianity, even in churches that have specific rules for fasting, like Yom Kippur, if you are sick, you don't have to fast. If you are under 18, you don't have to fast. If you're over 60, you don't have to fast. If you have any condition that if you're pregnant, if you have any condition that would make fasting a thing that might jeopardize your health, you don't have to fast. So again, we have to be reasonable about these things. Nobody is going to say, well, you should be willing to put your health on the line for God. That is not, it's not Episcopalian, it's not Christian, it's not even Jewish, it's not, no tradition insists that people fast. Now, yes, we did have a lot of people in our tradition who kind of took this to the extreme. St. Francis of Assisi, beloved saint, wonderful saint, patron saint of animals, patron saint of the environment, fasted 40 days on water more than once. On his deathbed, he said, I wish I had been kinder to my body. So yeah, especially in the Middle Ages, people took it to the extreme. We're in a time in our enlightenment where we don't need to take it to an extreme. Yeah, okay, so the idea that rather than giving up something for Lent, I'm going to take something on, I'm going to do something else, I'm going to be even busier. That's cool. It's not really fasting, but certainly I would never argue against doing something. If you want to add something to your list, you want to volunteer an additional day, or that's good. It's not fasting in the sense that we're talking about. If we open the door too wide on fasting, then there's no point in using the word fasting. Certainly, if you want to, for Lent, you want to spend time volunteering, you want to be kinder, you want to give up anger, you want to give up rudeness, all of those things are wonderful. They're wonderful. Or you can fast. Again, the important thing is to realize that fasting is not a way of paying off your sin. It's not penance, really. It has been looked at that way in our history, but I don't really talk to any modern, I don't read any modern theologians that are focusing on that, on the penitential aspect of fasting anymore. The one thing, in closing, the one thing I like about fasting is it's clean and it's neat. It's something you can do and you did it. So you feel, if you fast, even if it's a morning to sundown fast, when you finish it, if you didn't cheat, you feel like I did that, I accomplished that. Whereas sometimes just saying, well, I'm going to pray more. Well, did you pray more? I don't know, maybe a little bit. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming. Sometime in May, I might do a couple of weeks on the Nicene Creed and the Council of Nicaea, which should be tons of fun because they should make a movie about the Council of Nicaea. It was crazy. It was a crazy slam down. The emperor, who had just recently converted to Christianity, called a church council at his summer home in Nicaea on the beach in what's now Turkey. Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming.